engine off, now!
Officer, this is my
Step
home.
out of the vehicle right now!
I live here. I haven't done anything
Stop resisting!
wrong. I am Judge Vanessa Porter. This is my driveway.
I don't care who you are!
Officer Matthew Klein had been with the Crest Hill Police Department for 9 years, long enough to build a reputation, long enough to collect 7 internal complaints, 4 for excessive use of force, 3 for racial profiling, all internally investigated, all dismissed. No suspensions, no disciplinary action, no paper trail that ever made it past the department's legal division. Klein's personnel file used coded language, highly proactive, detail-oriented, takes initiative. But behind the euphemisms sat a pattern that anyone outside the precinct could see. He was aggressive. He escalated. And more often than not, the person on the receiving end of his suspicion had black or brown skin. A young man in a hoodie walking to his girlfriend's house, pulled over, cuffed, and searched without cause. A black delivery driver waiting outside a gated community, detained and questioned for 20 minutes while his customer's food went cold. A real estate agent showing a home in Westwood Terrace stopped, interrogated, told he didn't match the listing. Each complaint followed the same arc: filed, reviewed, closed. Sometimes with a recommendation for de-escalation training, sometimes not even that. One supervisor noted Klein had strong instincts but needs to develop more community awareness. Another wrote, effective in enforcement, though occasionally rigid. No one connected the dots. No one asked why his instincts always flared when the driver was black and the zip code started with 902. Fellow officers called him by the book, but off the record. Some said what others wouldn't. He pushes too hard. He makes mountains out of parking tickets. It's like he's looking for a fight. But Klein was never officially reprimanded. His stops resulted in enough citations to please his higher-ups, and his reports were always meticulously worded, his language precise, his justifications airtight on paper. The department's risk management team flagged him twice, quietly, based on stop and search data. Both times, they were told to focus elsewhere. And so Klein kept patrolling, kept stopping, kept deciding who did or didn't belong, until one Tuesday afternoon, he spotted a black woman in a black BMW pulling into a driveway in Crest Hill. And without checking plates, property records, or context, he made a decision that would end his career and cost the city $820,000. Crest Hill was the kind of neighborhood brochures called charming, the kind of place where lawn signs say, "Love lives here." But unspoken rules still govern who draws suspicion. A small enclave tucked just west of downtown, known for its safety, its good schools, and its HOA-enforced standards of perfection. Red brick colonials with stone chimneys, curved driveways edged by boxwoods trimmed to geometric precision, no visible trash cans, no basketball hoops in front yards, streets named after trees: Sycamore Lane, Elm Grove, Hawthorne Circle. It was 4:20 p.m. on a Tuesday in April. Clear skies, 68 degrees, soft sunlight angling through the dogwoods in bloom. Children were just getting home from school. Retirees were walking golden retrievers in polite silence. The kind of afternoon where everything looks exactly how it's supposed to. And into that picture rolled a black BMW, smooth and quiet, turning onto Azalea Drive. Judge Vanessa Porter was coming home. She'd just finished a day of hearings at the state courthouse downtown. Still in her black robe, still with her courthouse parking tag hanging from the rearview mirror. Her heels were off, resting on the passenger seat, flats on her feet. Her braided bun was slightly loosened from a long day on the bench. She was thinking about dinner, about her niece's upcoming college visits, about whether her mother remembered to take her afternoon medication. Her mind was on the ordinary details of a full life, not on being seen as a threat. She slowed, signaled, and pulled into her driveway's second house on the right. Brick facade, black shutters, azaleas blooming on either side of the front porch. A home she'd purchased with her own money 15 years earlier, paid off in full, title in her name. She put the car in park, reached to grab her briefcase. That's when she saw the cruiser roll up behind her. No sirens, no lights, just a slow, deliberate stop across the driveway, blocking her rear exit. The door opened. A white officer stepped out, hand on his belt, sunglasses still on, his gaze fixed on her windshield, then her face, then the car. Officer Matthew Klein didn't see a homeowner returning from work. He didn't see a judge. He saw something else. Something that, in his mind, didn't belong on Azalea Drive. And in that moment, everything else, titles, robes, mortgages, facts, ceased to matter. Vanessa Porter was 52 years old and had spent more than half her life inside courtrooms, not as a spectator, not as a defendant, but as someone entrusted with interpreting the law when lives, freedom, and futures hung in the balance. She was the first black woman ever appointed to the state appellate bench, a milestone that came after 25 years of work so methodical, so disciplined. It left little room for doubt about how she'd earned it. Harvard Law School, top of her class, law review, a federal clerkship that nearly broke her from the workload but sharpened her instincts. 12 years as a prosecutor known for something rare in that role, restraint. She didn't overcharge, she didn't posture. Defense attorneys trusted her word, judges trusted her judgment. Even defendants who lost cases acknowledged she was fair. That reputation followed her when she was elevated to the appellate court, where she became known for opinions that were precise, clear, and difficult to overturn. She wasn't flashy. She didn't chase headlines. She believed the law mattered because people mattered. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa's life was quieter than people expected. She lived in Crest Hill not for status, but for proximity. Close to the courthouse, close to her mother's doctors. Her mother, Eleanor, was 78 and dealing with early-stage Parkinson's. Some days were good, some weren't. Vanessa handled the bad ones the same way she handled the bench, calm, prepared, patient. Her niece, Aaliyah, lived with them too, 16 years old. Smart, restless, already talking about law school because she'd grown up watching her aunt read case law at the kitchen table. Vanessa liked that the house felt full, lived in. She liked being needed. Crest Hill neighbors knew her as polite but private. The woman who waved, kept her yard immaculate, and hosted a quiet graduation party every June for clerks who'd passed the bar. Some were surprised when they learned she was a judge. Others weren't. What no one questioned was that she belonged there. She paid her taxes, served her community, upheld the same laws Crest Hill claimed to value. She had argued constitutional principles for decades, sworn oaths to fairness and equal protection. She believed in the system enough to work inside it her entire adult life. Which is why what happened next wasn't just an arrest. It was a rupture, a moment when everything she had spent 25 years defending turned on her without hesitation. Officer Matthew Klein was not assigned to Crest Hill that afternoon. He wasn't responding to a burglary, a traffic accident, or a domestic call. He was cruising the neighborhood after dispatch relayed a vague report. Suspicious vehicle, unknown occupant, Azalea Drive. No plate number, no alleged crime, just suspicion. Klein slowed as he turned onto the street, scanning driveways the way he always did, looking for something that didn't fit his internal map of the neighborhood. And then he saw it. A black BMW, late model, clean, pulling into a driveway halfway down the block. A black woman behind the wheel. Klein made a decision in seconds. He didn't run the plates. He didn't wait to see if she exited the vehicle with keys. He didn't check property records, even though he could have from his cruiser. The dash camera would later show him braking hard and stopping behind her car before she'd finished backing in. The ring camera mounted above the garage would capture the same thing from a different angle. Vanessa's car still rolling, reverse lights still on. Klein's door opening, his boots hitting the pavement. Vanessa felt it before she fully registered it. The presence, the shift. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the cruiser blocking her in. No lights, no siren. Just an officer approaching fast, one hand already resting near his weapon. She hadn't even put the car in park yet. Klein leaned toward the driver's side window, posture rigid, voice sharp. "Turn the engine off. Now." Vanessa froze for half a second, startled more by the aggression than the interruption. "Officer, this is my home," she said evenly. Her tone instinctively measured the way it had been in courtrooms for decades. Klein didn't acknowledge the words. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask why she was there. His eyes moved from her face to the interior of the car, cataloging, judging. In his mind, the call had already been confirmed. Black woman, expensive car, Crest Hill driveway, suspicion justified. He stepped closer, invading her space as neighbors began to look up from their lawns. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Vanessa hadn't even opened her door. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't resisted anything. But Klein had already decided what she was, and once that decision was made, the facts no longer mattered. Vanessa didn't have time to process what was happening before the situation turned aggressive. Klein stepped up to her window, posture wide, hand already near his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle now," he barked. Not a greeting, not a reason, just volume and authority. Vanessa stayed calm. She always did. She rolled the window down and looked at him directly. "This is my home. I'm pulling into my driveway." Her voice was even, measured, controlled. But Klein wasn't listening. His eyes moved across her face and then dismissed her words entirely. "You match the description. I said get out of the car." "What description?" There wasn't one. Just black woman, BMW, Crest Hill. But that was enough for him. Enough to escalate. He didn't ask for her license, didn't ask her name, didn't ask a single clarifying question that might have ended the encounter before it began. Instead, he reached for the door handle and yanked it open without warning. Vanessa's seatbelt was still buckled. Her car was still running. She turned, startled. "Officer, please, this is my home. I haven't done anything." Klein didn't respond with words. He reached in and tried to pull her out. Her seatbelt stopped the motion. Her body jerked forward but caught. She winced. "Unbuckle it," he ordered, as if she were defying him on purpose. Ring footage from the neighbor's porch shows her holding her hands up, unbuckling slowly, trying to de-escalate what he had already lit into fire. "I live here," she repeated. But to Klein, compliance wasn't enough. Identity didn't matter. He wanted control, and he wasn't leaving without putting someone in cuffs. Vanessa stepped 1 foot out of the car. She kept her hands visible. She was calm, deliberate. But the moment she exited the vehicle, Klein grabbed her wrist, twisted it behind her back, and shoved her forward onto the hood. Her robe flared out around her. Her briefcase hit the ground, her head turned sharply against the hot metal. "Stop resisting!" he shouted, even though she hadn't moved. The street was silent, except for the sound of keys clattering, and a voice hers saying again and again, "I live here. This is my home." Vanessa tried one last time. She raised her voice just enough for clarity. "I am Judge Vanessa Porter. I live here. That is my house." But Klein didn't pause, didn't flinch, didn't process. He twisted her arm harder and shoved her flat against the hood, her cheek pressed to the warm metal. "I said stop resisting," he snapped again. A line he knew would sound good in the report, even if the body cam footage would later show the exact opposite. Vanessa kept her voice steady. She had no intention of giving him a reason to claim she was combative. "My ID is in the passenger seat," she said through clenched teeth. "My courthouse credentials are on the dash. My parking permit is visible. You're making a mistake." But Klein wasn't interested in credentials. He didn't look, didn't check, didn't slow down. Because in that moment, to him, none of those things mattered. The badge on the dashboard, the ID clipped to her briefcase, the permit, the robe, the history, all irrelevant. He saw a woman defying his command, not explaining, not resisting, just existing in a way that didn't fit his assumptions. "You're obstructing," he said, tightening the cuffs behind her back. "You're trespassing." "I'm in my own driveway," she replied. "This is my home." But facts weren't driving. This arrest impulse was. And pride. Klein wasn't going to be contradicted in front of a quiet street and an open ring camera. He'd made a choice the moment he stepped out of his cruiser, and now he was committed. From across the street, a neighbor appeared behind their screen door, watching, recording, too stunned to intervene, but smart enough to know something was very wrong. Vanessa looked up from the hood, her robe bunched under her shoulder, her knees pressed to the pavement. She was still calm, still controlled, still a judge, but in that moment, none of it mattered. Not to the officer who decided that authority didn't need proof, just a target and just enough noise to justify the takedown. The neighborhood was quiet until it wasn't. The screech of Vanessa's briefcase hitting the pavement, the sharp metallic clink of cuffs snapping shut, the sound of authority applied without thought. Then came the silence that always follows violence when no one knows what to say. That's when the phones came out. One neighbor stood behind a mailbox, recording with trembling hands. Another filmed from behind a curtain. A teenager on a bike stopped at the corner and hit record. The footage is now public. You can hear Vanessa's voice, measured, authoritative, trying to cut through panic. "Please, I'm a judge. My name is Vanessa Porter. This is my home. My mother is inside." She wasn't shouting. She wasn't flailing. She was narrating, documenting, bearing witness to her own arrest. Klein didn't acknowledge it, didn't stop. He gripped her shoulder and guided her roughly, needlessly, toward the cruiser. Vanessa was barefoot. Her heels still sat on the passenger seat where she left them. She shuffled across her own driveway, hands locked behind her, her black robe twisting around her legs. She looked like everything she was. Professional, composed, mistreated. "This is a mistake," she said again. "There are cameras. My neighbor has a Ring camera." She wasn't begging, she was warning. Not that it mattered. Klein opened the rear door and pushed her inside. The back seat of a cruiser with cracked vinyl, still warm from the sun. Vanessa's knees hit the doorframe as she slid in sideways, awkwardly, trying to maintain dignity in the face of the absurd. "I don't care who you are," Klein muttered as he closed the door. His voice, caught on the neighbor's recording, would go viral before sunset. 4 seconds. 6 words. A career reduced to a sentence. Vanessa sat in the back of the cruiser, her breath measured, her eyes forward. She'd spent years presiding over cases of unlawful arrest, police misconduct, wrongful detentions. She never thought she'd live one. But now, in her own driveway, she was no longer a judge, no longer a homeowner, no longer anything but cuffed, barefoot, and treated like a trespasser on land she owned. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, past manicured lawns and shaken neighbors, leaving behind a house, a mother who didn't know what was happening, and a city about to pay the price for a decision that took less than 3 minutes to make. The drive to the station was 12 minutes. Vanessa counted each one, not out of panic, but precision. That's what judges do. They count, they document, they remember. She noted the turns, the speed, the silence. Klein didn't say another word, not even a glance in the mirror. When they arrived, he parked without urgency, got out, opened her door, didn't offer help, just barked, "Let's go." Vanessa stepped out slowly, hands still cuffed behind her, shoulders straight. Her robe dragged slightly at the hem, catching on the uneven pavement. Her hair was frizzed at the edges, her shoes still missing. She walked barefoot through the station's side entrance, past uniformed officers who paused mid-conversation when they saw her. At the booking desk, a young sergeant looked up and froze. Recognition spread across his face. "Judge Porter?" Vanessa nodded. "Yes, Vanessa Porter, State Appellate Bench. I was arrested in my driveway without cause." The sergeant looked from her to Klein, who stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. "What the hell is going on?" Klein didn't flinch. Non-compliant subject. Matched a suspicious vehicle report. Refused to exit the car. Claimed she was a judge. Claimed. The word hung there like smoke. The sergeant looked again at Vanessa, her composure, the court parking tag, the unmistakable face from 100 legal briefings. "Lieutenant," he called. Within a minute, Lieutenant Miriam Hale appeared, 20 years on the job. No tolerance for nonsense. One glance at Vanessa and her expression changed. "You're telling me you arrested Judge Vanessa Porter in her own driveway?" "She refused to comply," Klein said. Hale didn't respond to him. She turned to the sergeant. "Get those cuffs off, now!" The sergeant obeyed immediately. The moment Vanessa's wrists were free, she rubbed them lightly, then folded her hands in front of her. "Thank you," she said, her voice unshaken. "I'd like this incident documented in full. Video, audio, all of it." Hale nodded. "It will be. I am so sorry, Judge Porter. You never should have been brought in." Klein shifted but stayed silent. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the quiet unraveling of authority built on assumptions and bad judgment. Within the hour, word reached the chief's office. By morning, the city would be scrambling, but the damage had already been done. It started with one neighbor's phone footage, 93 seconds, shaky but clear. A barefoot black woman in a black robe, cuffed and pushed into a patrol car while calmly saying, "This is my home." A white officer saying, "I don't care who you are." It hit Twitter before dinner time. 2 hours later, it was on the homepage of the local news site. By 9 p.m., 3 major outlets had picked it up. The headline practically wrote itself, "Black judge mistaken for criminal in her own driveway." By midnight, it was national. Footage from the Ring camera across the street, time-stamped, crystal clear, showed Officer Matthew Klein grabbing Judge Vanessa Porter before her car was fully parked. The dashcam audio, obtained through a public records request, added weight. Her calm, his escalation, her credentials, his disregard. Nothing about it was ambiguous. There was no blurred context, no complicated narrative. It was exactly what it looked like, an unlawful arrest of a respected judge in her own driveway for the crime of parking while black. Civil rights organizations responded first. The NAACP issued a statement before sunrise, calling the arrest a disgraceful example of racial profiling and institutional failure. The National Bar Association followed within hours. No judge, no citizen should be criminalized in their own driveway, especially not one with decades of public service. Lawyers' associations, law school deans, prominent judges, community leaders, all condemned the incident. Hashtags trended, number justice for Judge Porter, number black while home. Vanessa Porter herself released a short statement through her attorney. It was calm, direct, precise. "I was handcuffed, barefoot, and humiliated in my own driveway, while identifying myself as a judge and a homeowner. I will not let this stand because if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." The public fury was immediate and loud. Local talk radio lit up. Editorials ran in the papers. Online forums exploded. A woman with power, status, and credentials still wasn't safe from assumption, still wasn't spared from force. The mayor's office issued a vague statement about reviewing the facts. It wasn't enough. The pressure kept building. The city hadn't just arrested a judge, it had lit a match in the middle of a dry forest. And now, everything was catching fire. By the following afternoon, the mayor was on the defensive. Press swarmed City Hall. The mayor's press secretary canceled 3 scheduled events. "We're treating this with the utmost seriousness," she told reporters, reading from a prepared statement that said everything and nothing. Behind the scenes, things were moving faster. City council members were demanding answers. Emails flew, meetings were called. The police chief, under intense pressure, launched an internal affairs investigation before the day was over. Officer Matthew Klein was placed on administrative leave, standard language. But this time, it meant something different. His name was already out there. So was his record. 7 prior complaints. 4 use of force. 3 racial profiling. All internally investigated. All dismissed. Until now, that record had been invisible to the public. Now it was front page. The complaints painted a picture. Klein stopping black residents in upscale areas. Aggressive tone. Unnecessary escalation. Each time, his reports told a cleaner story than the truth. Each time, the department chose optics over action. The oversight board had flagged him once low priority. Nothing came of it. The union backed him. Command looked the other way. Klein was seen as proactive, a cop who didn't back down. Now, all those descriptions looked like warnings ignored. One council member called it a systemic failure. Another called it an entirely predictable outcome. Klein's body camera footage hadn't even been released yet, but it no longer mattered. The Ring video and neighbor clips had already shaped public opinion. The investigation, officials claimed, would be thorough and independent. But residents weren't asking for another report. They wanted accountability. They wanted action. The police union released a brief statement defending the right of officers to assess threats in real time. It didn't help. The backlash grew louder. Former judges began speaking out. Local law professors weighed in. Even conservative commentators found themselves stunned. How could a judge, someone known in every legal circle, be so easily dismissed? So casually brutalized? City officials knew what was coming. Lawsuits, protests, policy reviews, late-night news segments. The kind of storm that doesn't pass quickly. And at the center of it all was a driveway, a pair of cuffs, and a black woman who had done everything right and still ended up in the back of a cruiser. Judge Vanessa Porter didn't rush to file. She waited. Let the facts stack themselves in full view. Let the city respond. Let the department squirm. Then, 2 weeks after the arrest, her legal team submitted a federal civil rights lawsuit that landed like a gavel strike. It was 57 pages of precision and weight allegations backed by timestamps, footage, history, and law. The complaint named the city, Officer Matthew Klein, the police department, and several command staff members in their official capacities. The charges were clear: unlawful arrest, excessive use of force, racial profiling, 4th and 14th Amendment violations, public humiliation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the suit wasn't just about that Tuesday afternoon. It was about a pattern, a system, a department that had 7 opportunities to rein in one officer and chose not to. Her attorneys laid it out with surgical detail. 7 prior complaints against Klein, all dismissed. 4 alleging aggressive physical force. 3 pointing to racial bias during traffic and pedestrian stops. In every case, the department's response was identical: minimal internal review, no discipline, training modules that went unmonitored. The lawsuit included internal documents obtained through a whistleblower, emails from supervisors flagging Klein's conduct, memos that described tension with minority community members, performance reviews coded with terms like assertive field tactics and officer safety first mindset. One lieutenant wrote that Klein appears to escalate routine stops, particularly involving residents of color. That memo never left the desk. Vanessa's legal team pointed to her status not as a shield, but as a measuring stick. If a sitting appellate judge clearly identified, calm, unarmed, and standing on her own property can be violently arrested without cause, the complaint read, what protection exists for anyone else? The lawsuit drew national attention. Civil rights groups called it a landmark case in the making. Legal scholars described it as the rare kind of suit that challenges not only conduct, but the system that allowed it. The city's legal team called it complex. Others called it indefensible. The dollar amount was unspecified, but the message was not. The case wasn't just about what happened in one driveway. It was about everything the department failed to do in the years leading up to it, and how silence, over time, becomes policy. Discovery opened the department's internal operations like a cracked vault. What spilled out wasn't just negligence, it was complicity. In deposition after deposition, the story stayed the same. Officers raised concerns. Supervisors acknowledged patterns. But nothing happened. One former sergeant admitted under oath, Klein was known for pushing boundaries. Everyone knew, but he brought in stats. Another lieutenant, still active duty, said, we flagged his stops 2 years ago. It got buried in the command shuffle. Nobody wanted to take it on. Emails revealed even more. In 2021, a field supervisor had sent a report to upper command noting Klein's disproportionate stop rate of black drivers in majority white neighborhoods. The email ended with a simple question: are we watching this officer closely enough? No one responded. Internal Affairs had reviewed Klein 3 separate times over the years. Each time, the file closed with insufficient evidence, despite civilian witnesses and body cam inconsistencies. One review board member privately emailed, "This officer is going to cost us a lawsuit eventually." He was right. Most damning of all was a memo from the department's own risk management office, dated 14 months before Judge Porter's arrest. It read, "Subject: Officer Matthew Klein, Field Conduct Monitoring Recommendation. Review of complaint patterns and stop data suggest Officer Klein is escalating unnecessarily during routine stops, particularly involving Black residents. Recommend supervisory ride-alongs and retraining focused on de-escalation and bias response. The memo was marked as reviewed, but never acted upon. During questioning, a deputy chief acknowledged reading it. We didn't implement it because we were dealing with union pressure over prior disciplinary cases. We had to pick our battles. That sentence would haunt the city's legal team throughout the case. A department that picked the wrong battles. A leadership team that gambled with risk and lost. Vanessa Porter's attorneys used it all. Every ignored email, every paper trail that stopped halfway, every officer who said, "I tried to speak up, but wasn't heard." The judge's arrest was no longer an isolated incident. It was Exhibit A in a culture that saw complaints not as red flags, but as paperwork. And in a courtroom where truth mattered, that culture was now on trial. It took 8 months. 8 months of depositions, public pressure, and mounting legal bills before the city finally caved. The evidence was undeniable. The footage was everywhere. The outrage hadn't faded. The lawsuit wasn't just strong, it was devastating. In a closed-door meeting, city attorneys briefed council members on the likelihood of losing at trial. One of them reportedly said, "We don't just have exposure, we have liability carved in stone." The settlement was finalized that same week, $820,000 paid to Judge Vanessa Porter. A historic amount, one of the largest in state history for an unlawful arrest involving a judicial officer on private property. The check was a formality. The admission came in the language attached. The city acknowledged that constitutional rights were violated, that Vanessa was subjected to force and detainment without legal basis, that the arresting officer, Matthew Klein, had a documented history that should have triggered further scrutiny. A week later, the police chief issued a formal apology. It was read aloud at a public hearing, cameras rolling, microphones hot. The arrest of Judge Vanessa Porter was unjustified, inappropriate, and in direct violation of our department's policies and the principles of constitutional policing. On behalf of the department, I extend my deepest apologies. It wasn't enough, but it was more than most get. As for Klein, he was terminated. The termination letter was direct. Officer Klein failed to conduct a lawful stop, failed to de-escalate, failed to verify identity, and used unnecessary force against a civilian later confirmed to be a sitting appellate judge on her own property. This incident, compounded by a documented history of similar conduct, renders Officer Klein unfit for continued service. His name was submitted to the National Decertification Index, a list maintained to prevent fired officers from quietly moving to other departments. His badge was gone. His career was over. The police union considered filing a grievance, but after reviewing the internal investigation and deposition transcripts, they backed off. There was no case to make, not when the whole country had already seen what happened, not when the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. The city paid, the department apologized, the officer was fired, but justice, as Vanessa would later say, costs more than money. It costs what's taken in the moment, the dignity, the safety, the assumption that you belong where you are, even in your own driveway. The press conference was held on the courthouse steps, the same courthouse where Vanessa Porter had presided for over a decade. She stood behind the podium in a navy suit, not her robe, no entourage, no theatrics, just strength, clarity, and a truth she was no longer willing to let others define. Cameras clicked as she began. "Good morning. My name is Vanessa Porter. I am a judge on the state appellate bench. I interpret the law. I uphold the Constitution. I protect the rights of every citizen who comes before me." She paused, let the silence settle. "And I was treated like a suspect in my own driveway because of the color of my skin." The crowd was silent press, colleagues, activists, ordinary citizens, all listening. I was handcuffed, barefoot, pushed into a patrol car while my credentials sat in plain view. I identified myself. I remained calm. I followed every instruction. None of it mattered. She spoke without notes, without emotion clouding her voice, just fact after fact. If this can happen to me with my education, my title, my record, my position, what happens to those without titles, without credentials, without cameras? What happens to the young man walking home from work, to the woman pulling into a friend's house, to someone with no one watching? Her voice rose just slightly, controlled, still, but resolute. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about a system that ignored 7 complaints, that rewarded escalation, that failed to act until it became public. She closed the folder in front of her but didn't step away. I settled this case not because money restores dignity, but because accountability must start somewhere. I'm still a judge. I'm still a homeowner. I'm still a citizen. But I will never unlive that moment in my driveway. One final pause. So I ask this city, what are we doing to ensure the next person isn't cuffed before they're heard? And will we only believe people when they wear a robe, or will we believe them when they say, I live here, and that be enough? With that, she stepped back. The cameras stayed on her, but the silence in the crowd said more than any lens ever could. The headlines faded. The protests quieted. The settlement was paid, the officer fired, the apology issued. But the real question lingered like fog after a storm. What actually changes now? City officials scrambled to prove this wasn't just damage control. They announced reforms measured, structured, written in the formal language of bureaucracy, but still real. Effective immediately, officers were required to verify identification before initiating physical contact, unless there was an immediate safety threat. No more detain first, verify later. New policy. Any officer with 3 or more complaints of racial bias or excessive force within a 24-month period would trigger an automatic internal audit. No discretion, no delay. Also implemented, a new public-facing database to track race-based stop data, searchable by precinct, officer, and outcome. It was designed to show patterns, not bury them in paperwork. Most notably, a community oversight board was formed, composed of civilians with subpoena power and access to disciplinary records. No more closed-door investigations, no more invisible misconduct. For the first time, residents had a seat at the table and the authority to hold officers accountable. The mayor called it a new chapter. The police chief called it a cultural reset. The public called it overdue. These weren't perfect solutions. They didn't erase what had happened in Vanessa Porter's driveway. They didn't erase the 7 complaints ignored before it. But they were more than nothing. They were movement, progress born out of pressure. Still, Vanessa herself was measured in her response. At a private roundtable with lawmakers, she said plainly, "Policies are only as strong as the people who enforce them. We can't legislate bias away. We can't write enough rules to undo a mindset that sees black skin as suspicious by default." That was the truth beneath the reforms. That was the hard part, the part that doesn't change with memos or mandatory trainings, because behind every bad arrest is a decision. A moment where judgment gives way to assumption, where power overrides listening, where presence becomes presumed threat. So yes, the city changed policies. It published data. It fired a cop. It paid a judge. But the real test isn't whether it avoided the next lawsuit. It's whether it prevents the next Vanessa Porter, the next person arrested in their own driveway, forced to prove they belong. Because until that stops, we haven't changed nearly enough. This case was brutal, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.